Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm Tami, fibromyalgia coach, author, and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. The goal of this podcast is to empower you with access to the dream team of experts and coaches I've discovered are key to living the fibro life you love. From the comfort of your own home, and maybe even your pajamas, I'll help you take back control of your life and health. To help out with FibroFog, I always include full show notes and additional resources at fibromyalgiapodcast.com. You're listening to the Fibromyalgia Podcast with Tami, episode 55. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami, and I am so excited for you to hear today's episode. Over the last couple of months, I've gotten a bunch of questions from our listeners, from my clients, and even from my students about the laws and the rights surrounding emotional support animals and service animals. I know a lot of us find incredible comfort in our animals, and so this episode, I am interviewing Jennifer Kolar of Atlas Assistance Dogs. Atlas is a nonprofit organization that helps patients train their own animals, their own dogs, to be service animals. And I am so excited about the work that they're doing. Of course, before we dive into that, I want to give our listener shout out for this episode. This goes out to Deb in New Zealand, who did give us permission to use her name. So hi, Deb. She says, I just wanted to say thank you. I've had chronic pain for 7 years and have recently been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Your book contains a wealth of information and will help me plan ahead to manage this condition. She goes on to say, I've also just listened to the Year in Review podcast, episode 52, while I went on a gentle walk. I'll listen again and write the lists later on today. I've seen, read, listened to, and been told a lot of information about how to manage chronic pain over the last few years. But the combination of stuff you put together really resonates with me as a holistic approach. I'm a boom and buster, currently overwhelmed by the last few weeks' festivities, so stumbling on your stuff was the best happy accident ever. Thank you so much, Deb. And I'm so glad that you are going to sit down again and go back over episode 52. For those of you who haven't listened yet, episode 52 and episode 53 are where we review the prior year and make plans for the upcoming year. And there's a few exercises that I walk you through where you write down what it is that worked, that didn't work, and what you want to be different about the next year. So if you haven't taken the time to do that, I encourage you to go back and listen. You'll find links to all of those episodes on today's show notes. Just go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com/55 and we will link all of the episodes there. Just a quick reminder, we've had a lot of interest in our next Fibromyalgia Advisor training program. That was originally starting on February 9th, but we've had a lot of interest, and so we're actually extending that deadline. If you are interested in maybe someday becoming a coach or just learning about fibromyalgia and how you can manage your own illness, make sure you reach out to us. There's still time to join. Just go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com/55. We'll have a link to that class as well. Okay, now let's talk about our furry friends. Oh my gosh, I am so excited for this episode. I did this interview with Jennifer back in the beginning of January, and I have just been so excited about the information that I learned in the episode and about the work that her organization is doing. Jennifer has been surrounded by animals since she was a young child. She said she's always had at least one dog at her side and has been actively training since before she was 10. Dogs have been her constant companion. She started actively volunteering, training, and working with service dog organizations in 2008. And she says she's witnessed firsthand the amazing difference that well-trained dogs can make in the lives of veterans, other adults, and children with physical, emotional, or psychological challenges. And she is really driven to just help as many people and dogs as possible experience that amazing transformation. In 2012, Jennifer was one of 4 people who founded Paws Training Centers, which is now known as Compass Key, a business specializing in owner-based service dog training. She is also a founding board member of Atlas Assistance Dog and currently serves as the organization's vice president. Atlas Assistance Dog was founded to help overcome the barriers people with disabilities face in trying to get a service dog to help overcome some of the challenges of everyday life. They really saw the real and meaningful change that service dogs made in the lives of people with disabilities, but also realized that people with disabilities encountered a lot of obstacles in trying to obtain a service dog. Cost, limited availability. Many of the service dog foundations had a very narrow focus, and so many other challenges. Atlas knows that many people are capable of training their own service dogs, but there's very limited support and resources available for owner training. Plus, of course, when you already have a disability or a chronic illness, then you've got extra challenges, right? So Atlas really focuses on helping owners succeed at becoming trainers of their own animals. Trained Atlas volunteers work hands-on with their clients to guide them in their training and to help them really just live fuller and more independent lives with the support of their service dog. So listen in as I interview Jennifer. We talk about her history and background. We talk about the difference between an emotional support animal and a service dog. We also talk about how Atlas goes about teaching other people how to train their own service animals, which is a pretty incredible thing when you think about it. I also particularly love, there's a point in the middle of this interview where you can really hear Jennifer's passion comes through, where she talks about the stigma around mental health. And I just know this is going to really hit home for you listening. So enjoy this interview. And I do just want to put a quick disclaimer on here. Jennifer has worked in this industry for many years, but there may be differences in laws in certain cities or states, which she does talk about in the interview. So just know that she is an expert that we're speaking with, but that it's not necessarily meant to be specific legal advice for you and your situation. So make sure you check out the laws where you are. In the meantime, enjoy my conversation with Jennifer. All right. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to the Fibromyalgia podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I am so excited to talk to you. I was actually just talking with a few people this week about the work that you do and how excited I was to find out about it. And so I'm thrilled to be able to share this with the audience. So why don't we start with the basics? How did you get into this world? How did Atlas Dog come to be? How did you get interested in working with service animals and helping people with disabilities?
You bet. So I've been around animals my whole life and grew up training my own dogs. And we were sort of the family. If there was a stray, you name it, it came to us, and my mom especially, but we tried to figure out how to help them and fix them, and did training with my own dogs as a child and then as an adult. And then started volunteering I was on the East Coast for a while and started volunteering with a nonprofit foundation that was fairly young at the time, that was building a breeding program and mostly working with veterans with disabilities, and helped them develop a lot of their training protocols and programs. And that's really where my first experience working hands-on with clients was. And I built a lot of my chops kind of helping manage their kennels and train a lot of their trainers and develop protocols, and really seeing the difference it could make for these people of, the amount of independence it gave them, the amount of relief it gave other people and their families to have somebody other than themselves as the only caretaker, that, hey, now there's a dog who can go help fetch the medicine. There's a dog who can go open that door. So it was a huge amount of relief and independence for the individual with the disability, and also a huge amount of relief and support for the others in the household that otherwise may have been helping caretake. And from there, really just expanded into more and more professional dog training. Myself and a couple of others who are involved in that nonprofit started a for-profit dog training business, recognizing that as a foundation, there were so many more people who needed help than we were able to serve. And also that there were many people who had their own dogs, that the dog was partially meeting their needs and they just needed a little more support. Or we're looking for cases where someone could board and train a dog and do extensive training for a long time. And then we were seeing and looking at kind of the ethics of how training has traditionally been done in service dog training, that it hasn't always been, and in some cases still isn't, the most focused on what's best for the dog. Service dog training very much came out of originally police dog training that then went into guide dog training, and it was very utilitarian. And while many of the guide dog schools have shifted a lot toward either all or partially positive methods, there's still a fair amount of the means justify the ends. We need to get these dogs out to help these people. And we were really looking at seeing both how people could be treated by these organizations and kind of flooded or put in situations that were very stressful for them when working with the service dog, or the dogs could be put in situations that just weren't appropriate. And we really wanted to have a nonprofit that gave people that couldn't afford a private trainer, didn't fit in with the foundations. We wanted to give them a means that individual owners could train their own dogs in a way that was profoundly ethical, that was fair for the dog and the person. And part of starting a nonprofit is we wanted to meet all the qualifications of Assistance Dog International, which is the closest thing there is to a standard in the US for certification. We're still in the middle of meeting their qualifications, but they only recognize nonprofits. And we really wanted to be a much more available resource than, say, the for-profits could be, or the foundations could be. So it's sort of filling that gap. And that's where we started, was really coming into the saying, hey, there's people who couldn't possibly afford a private trainer, aren't going to qualify or don't live where a foundation could support them, or just can't wait that many years. And you have a dog already that's partially meeting their needs. How do we jump in there and do that at a cost and price point that makes it accessible to everybody, but with the quality and standards of any of those larger foundations?
I love that. I love that. And I know one of the things about a lot of service animals and getting a service dog is the wait is really long and it can be super expensive, which makes it really inaccessible for a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. The wait, if you're lucky enough to be accepted by an organization, and there are many wonderful foundations out there who provide dogs, and there's many people who really couldn't be in the position of training their own dog. So they're doing a very important service, but the waits can easily be 3 to 5 years. And where you are in that list can rotate and change. And then, yes, in some of those organizations, there are fees. Others, there are kind of payback campaigns where you help pay back or fundraise for the next person. Or there's private trainers where you could go and try to purchase a trained dog to varying success. Some of those trainers are ethical, and that's part of our program, is we're trying to train trainers to have more ethical service dog trainers out there. But there are plenty of cases that you'll see in the news, unfortunately, of people being taken advantage of someone paying $15,000, getting a 6-month-old dog or getting a 2-year-old dog that then attacks the kids in the house. There's sadly many, many of those cases because people are desperate. And so there's other people willing to take advantage of them.
Right, right.
So we're really trying to help avoid that.
I love it. I love it. And so many people have animals that could be trained, have dogs that could be trained, right? So I love that you give people that option. So I think we need to pause for a minute here and define some terms for people. So there's been a lot of talk about service animals, has been specifically what you and I have just been talking about, but there's also been a lot of talk about emotional support animals. And having lived in Portland for several years, I remember seeing on the news a while back, somebody was on the bus with an emotional support snake, um, which does not support my emotional health, I just have to say. So why don't we define some terms, talk about what those two things mean and the differences?
You bet. So an emotional support animal, and just to be clear, those are defined differently in different states and even cities. For example, I don't know if they still do, but Seattle, Washington, where I am, it had recognized emotional support cats in housing, but they don't have the same kind of federal definition that service dogs do under the American with Disability Act. An emotional support animal, just by their very presence alone, provides comfort. So that person may be somebody who has, typically it's somebody with some sort of mental health issue or stress or trauma. They are somebody that has a disability, but the animal's presence alone is what is helping. Their animal isn't trained to do anything to directly mitigate their symptoms. So they aren't interrupting an anxiety attack. They aren't stopping self-harm. They aren't bringing the medication. It's just the pure presence of them being there that provides support, and which for many people can be really valuable. So I do want to, while I'm part of a service dog organization, I do want to recognize that emotional support animals can play a great role. They also don't have anywhere near the level of training requirements of a service dog. They don't have any public rights or public access rights that a service dog would have. A service animal in the US, a service animal is defined under the American with Disabilities Act, is an animal that's been, in particular, it's a dog or a miniature horse, who has been individually trained to mitigate provide at least one task that mitigates the needs of somebody with a disability. And that disability would need to be something that has significant impacts on their day-to-day life. So that's recognized as either a dog or under the ADA, as of the last, I think, 10 years, a miniature horse. As many people with mobility issues are finding miniature horses live a lot longer and can provide more support.
That's so interesting. I wondered why miniature horses, like out of all of the possible animals that could be, why miniature horses, but that actually does.
They can live about 40 years or more. They're not that much bigger than a sort of a large dog, and they're very sturdy and stable. So that's where you'll see them more now, is for people that need significant mobility support. And because of their lifespan, you get that advantage over a dog. They're still not widely seen or widely accepted in a lot of areas, but they are protected under the law. So if your dog, say you have a disability and your dog just happens to be around and is laying on your lap and you feel good, that's an emotional support. If you have a disability and your dog is trained to recognize that, oh, I'm moving my leg in a certain way, the dog will then perform a predictable behavior. If maybe I'm going to come and lay on top of you and provide pressure, then that would be a trained task. So you could be somebody with the same disability. It's just whether the dog has been trained to do something specifically to mitigate that disability. Now, if I could, so for example, I can go open a door with no problems. So my dog, if all he did was open a door for me, that would not be a legitimate task for me. That's not something I need help with.
Right. And I think that's a good point to define disability as well. Especially for the people listening to this podcast having fibromyalgia. We have good days, we have bad days. There are days where we're just like any other normal person, but then there's days when we're not so good. So let's talk about that. What defines a disability when it comes to the service dog? And
Sure. And so to some extent, it's in the eye of the beholder. It's a very broad definition under the American with Disabilities Act. Essentially, it's, do you have a condition that significantly impacts your ability to carry on normal life day to day? Obviously, with chronic conditions, that's going to vary day to day. But so in general, is that something is it severe enough that it impacts your function? For most people that have fibromyalgia that they're dealing with any amount of chronic pain or fatigue, that absolutely, if you're seeing, okay, I'm struggling to perform tasks that would otherwise be very simple for a person who doesn't have that, then yes, that legitimately is to be considered a disability. And it's really up to the individual within that. It's very, very broad.
hmm And I remember when you and I were talking before recording this, that mental health, physical health, like it's all one thing now. They're all seen the same way. Yeah.
So always should have been. It's under the Department of Transportation and Airline Carrier Act that they now officially are recognized as the same. But from the perspective of destigmatizing mental health and also recognizing that very few people are clean cut and fit in a box and they just have, oh, I have this one little issue and I have nothing else.
Right. If only life were that easy.
Right. So most people don't just fit in a tiny little box that says, oh, I have this one specific disability and nothing else. Most people that are struggling with one thing, there typically are some amounts of stress or fatigue with that. There may be some trauma. There may be kind of a mix of things going on. Usually there could be a mix of cognitive, physical, neurological, emotional, mental. They all come together and they all feed off on each other. And especially when you're looking at something that's a chronic illness, then the mental stress of that and emotional stress of that absolutely ties in. So, and there's so much stigma in our society to say, oh, I have a mental health disorder. And so that was one of the frustrating things with the old way the Airline Carrier Act was starting to look, that they were separating psychiatric support as being different from any other disability. And that's something I really strongly believe in, and we at Atlas really strongly believe in, is that mental health is not something to be ashamed of. I have a service dog for psychiatric support. I have an anxiety disorder. My dog helps me. I live a very functional and full life with my dog. And I have no qualms about saying that that's something I work with. And I would like us as a society get to the point that there's no more of a stigma of mental health or chronic illness than there is of somebody in a wheelchair.
100%. Thank you so much for saying that. That's so true. I mean, that's one of the things that we run into with fibromyalgia all the time is I look fine, right? I look totally fine. And some days I even act fine, right? But that doesn't mean I'm fine all the time. I might be dealing with depression, anxiety, all kinds of things. So thank you so much for saying that. People really need to hear that. And I think our community too struggles a little bit with that word disability, because we can do a lot of things. I'm not disabled, right? Like I'm not missing a leg. I'm not in a wheelchair. I'm not, whatever. But we do have these conditions that interfere with our ability to live life.
Right. And I think if you look at it from the perspective of, and I love this, that recently there was the Abilities Expo, which was looking at promoting all the abilities of everybody that are differently abled, if you will. And that's sort of what we look at from Atlas too. We try to look and say, we're not trying to support people to have a life in spite of their disability. We're trying to say, hey, let's have the life you can have because of, right? Thrive with who you are. Recognize this is a part of you. This is a part of your journey, and thrive with that. It's not something to hide from or be ashamed of. It's just a part of who you are and who I am. And really trying to look at it from that perspective, which society does not make it easy for us to do, and especially doesn't make it easy for people with chronic illness. And with chronic fatigue.
Yep. Definitely.
And, having an invisible disability is something that is, people kind of are, at least now we're getting used to, oh, it's not just a seeing eye dog. It's not just somebody in a wheelchair. And that can be the good and bad of having a service dog. They can sort of shine a light on you that there's something society would quote unquote call wrong, but they also could be a way to open that conversation that people will realize, hey, maybe there's something going on with this person. And I'm not going to just assume that there isn't. So it can play both ways for people, whether it's good or bad to have that visual presence of the service dog. But yeah, I think it's something that for people with chronic illness in particular, that people that haven't experienced that really don't understand.
Yeah, definitely. So when we're talking about a service animal needing to perform certain tasks that help somebody with a disability, does that mean I need to have a handicap parking tag? Does that mean I just need a note from my doctor? Like, what does that mean?
Good question. So that's a pretty broad thing. So right now in the US, there is no such thing as a certification for service dogs. There is no central registry. There is no requirement for ID. There's no requirement for a formal trainer. There's no requirement for a vest. There are lots and lots of scams out there to tell people they must register, they must certify. It's so misspread and misunderstood that many businesses will ask for that kind of information when you go there because they don't understand the laws. So right now in the US, again, as long as you feel you have some condition that impacts your quality of life day to day, that counts as a disability under the American Disabilities Act. Then, if you have a dog who's well-mannered and non-obtrusive in public and has been trained to do something that directly mitigates that disability, that dog can be considered a service dog under the American Disabilities Act. So it does not mean that you have to have anything that's visible. It does not mean that you have to be lying in a heap in the ground and not able to function. And it doesn't mean that it has to be something that takes you out every single day. One of the things to really think about, and we like to think about this with service dogs, is all of us we don't wake up in the morning and go, oh, well, sometimes we do, but usually we hopefully don't wake up in the morning and go, oh, I hope I can just be alive today and do the basic functional tasks of living. Most of us want to wake up and go, hey, I want to do something meaningful. I want to do something I enjoy. I want to contribute. So why should a service dog only be part of doing base functional needs to just survive the day? Why can't they be part of expanding our world to do more? For example, for people with arthritis, my father, one of the founders of Atlas, has severe arthritis. His dog Turner guarantees he can still go and hike every day. He helps get him up and down the hills. He gets him over the rocks. Is that necessary for him to wake up and eat and live through the day? Maybe not biologically, but psychologically, there's nothing more important to him. And why shouldn't a service dog be part of helping you get out in the world, helping you do activities that give you a fuller life? So that's another thing I challenge people to think about, that a service dog is much more than just basic bare functions in life, that we should look at anything we do in any of these animals as a way to help us have fuller lives. And we all have the right to have that. So really being creative too about what are these tasks the dogs are doing and what worlds can they open that we can do more of.
I love that. I love that. I know this is the fibromyalgia podcast, but I think anxiety is such a good example of the ways that a dog could help, right? Because I can still open doors, I can still turn on light switches, I can still go do things, but that anxiety might keep me stuck at home doing nothing instead of out in the world, right? Yeah. So what kinds of things then would you train a dog to do if physical things, sure, opening door, turning on light, whatever, but like what non-physical things would you be training a dog to do, if that makes sense?
Sure. Yeah. So, and if we look at some of the typical, and you can tell me more, obviously, but if you look at some of the typical things, as I understand it, people with fibromyalgia suffer through. So some of it is balance and mobility and just providing that proprioception and support. And that doesn't have to be a big dog that you're putting all your weight on. It can just be that kind of presence or counterbalance next to you. I will warn, there's a lot of risk of hurting a dog if you're not using them properly for any mobility work. So I'd really encourage people to talk with their vet and talk with a trainer before they ever consider doing any kind of load bearing work on their dog. But then there's things. So for example, a lot of the tasks that we teach dogs to help with mitigating different psychiatric conditions also help with chronic pain. So deep pressure is one, that the dog being trained that they will lay across your lap, or they can lay along your body, they can lay along your legs. There's a lot of science that goes into looking at the animal-human bond. And there's a lot of science that shows the pheromones that are released and the dopamine that's released by the physical act of touching. And that dogs, I recently did a presentation for a group of nurses in an emergency room to talk about how their own pets can help provide them some of the kind of support our service dogs do to relieve trauma and stress in a really stressful situation like our frontline healthcare providers have right now. And one of the things was really looking at the science and recognizing that just that contact with the dog, just petting them, even if they're not trained to do anything else, just that contact alone lowers our blood pressure, lowers our heart rate, makes us healthier. It's just that alone is helpful. So then add that to a trained behavior that maybe I'm not move, maybe I'm moving a certain way or not moving a certain way, that the dog treats that as a cue, just like a word, like the word sit could be a cue. Dogs are really visual, actually. They're much more visual than auditory. So, most of us are used to, we've seen hand signals, like, okay, that could mean sit. Well, blinking my eyes a certain way could be too. Or the presence of my leg being in a certain place, or being in a certain location, or just the presence of an object in the room. Any of those, what we call environmental cues, those are just as salient of cues to dogs as saying sit. So if you think about it, you nervously picking at your fingers to cue the dog to push your hands apart and to stay there and interrupt. Somebody who's suddenly wobbly and disoriented, the dog can push into them. If somebody sort of goes off into a blank stare, this is not uncommon before a seizure might happen or a dissociative event. The dog can be trained to pick up on that and interrupt, jump on your lap, nudge at you, nose. For people that deal with panic attacks, that kind of curl up in a ball, the dogs can be trained to kind of push underneath you, push into your arms to try to interrupt that. I've known people that have migraines that the dog licking repeatedly their hand will encourage blood flow away from the head, will actually help calm them. So there's a lot of things we don't fully yet understand what dogs pick up on for medical conditions. There's some we do. We fully understand scientifically what they're picking up on, say, for diabetes. There's still, that's scent-based, and that's very well understood. There's a lot we don't yet understand for a lot of other medical conditions. There's a lot of theory about scent, but I'm very careful to kind of distinguish what could be trained as a response versus an alert. But there are so many things the dog could do to provide that psychiatric support. But then in addition, they could bring you medicine. They could go call for help. Maybe you've fallen. Maybe you're feeling really nauseous. You can send them off to go get medicine. You can send them off to go alert somebody else in the house. If it's somebody who has hearing challenges, they can let them know when the phone rings, if the fire alarm goes off. They can help bring them to find things. It's really amazing how much dogs can do when you step back and think about it. And it's just a matter of how do we say, okay, what is the behavior I'm doing, visible or not? The dogs may be picking up on it without us realizing it. And then how do we shape that into something that's reliable so that they're doing it repeatedly?
That's so fascinating. As you were talking, I was thinking back to when I was at my worst and some of the things that I used to do. And I thought of all kinds of things. Like one of the things, I had a friend once tell me that when my blood sugar was low, I walked differently. Right? Like shuffling my feet a little bit more or whatever. When we're in pain, we tend to hold the part that hurts, right? If we're laying on our beds versus like up working or whatever, right? Like you're laying in your bed at a weird time, or, I mean, there's so many things. If you get really tired and really stressed, if you get extra emotional, right? So you're sniffling and crying a little bit, right?
Yep, those are breathing really heavily, starting to kind of go into that kind of hyperventilation. Dogs are incredibly sensitive and aware of these really subtle cues. And a lot of times it's just us listening to them. That's one of the amazing things about working with individual owners who are training their dogs, is often the dog's already aware of what's going on. The person just has no idea the dog is alerting them to it. So the dog may be doing something a little weird before somebody has whatever episode, and they just don't know. And so it's part of is watching the dog and listening to their dog and realizing that their dog's been telling them all along and they just don't know.
Right. I've had so many clients who will say, I don't know how my dog knows, but he always knows when I'm having a bad day. Right? That's exactly what you're talking about.
And it may be that we have some physical unconscious tick that we're doing that they pick up on. It may be a smell. It may be, body tension. There's a lot of things that they're very, very aware of. And as a result, these little subtle cues can be turned into things that then cue them to do things for you. Other things that can really help for people that have anxiety or hearing issues, we can teach a dog to alert if anybody comes within, say, 6 feet of you. So they can essentially be an extra set of eyes that watches around you. A nice one that we'll use for people that have a lot of severe social anxiety might be a really subtle cue, like that somebody else wouldn't see, but maybe like moving a finger up under a table or shifting your foot slightly means the dog stands, or the dog stands and leads you toward a door. so that, oh, it's the dog who needs to go out. It's not me who needs to leave the room.
Oh,
It
that's
relieves
awesome.
relieves a lot of social pressure to say, I can't be here anymore. Instead of, my dog needs this.
Right, right.
So
Oh,
there's a
that's
lot
so
of things
awesome.
that can help you relieve that social pressure by just putting it on the dog. And then flip, by having that dog, they need to get out on a walk every day. They need exercise. They're social. So they make us interact, and they make us be healthier, and they make us do things that keep us from being able to kind of curl up into a little world.
And there's something too about taking care of someone or something else and loving them unconditionally that teaches us how to take care of ourselves and love ourselves, you know? Yeah, that's great. So I know with as we were talking earlier about emotional support animals versus service animals and some of the laws there. Can we go a little bit deeper into that? Like there's been a lot of changes with Department of Transportation, so let's talk about that. But also things like I need to go rent an apartment, right? And can I they have a no pets policy, or going to a restaurant or hotel or whatever.
You bet. So at now, if we were to look at an emotional, so essentially there's pets, there's emotional support animals, and there's service animals. There's sort of other categories of working animals, but kind of keeping within, these are the three most individuals are going to deal with in their life. A pet can go anywhere a pet can go. So you don't have any special rights. With an emotional support animal, the rights you have now are they can, under the Fair Housing Act, even a place that doesn't allow pets, if you have, and you have to have a letter from your doctor that says you have a medical need. And then you need to have a dog. Typically, they're going to require vet records. They don't necessarily require any training or anything like that, but just you will have to have a letter from your doctor showing a medical need. Then under the Fair Housing Act, they are required to allow you to have that animal. That's at this point really the one protection that exists for emotional support animals now. They used to be covered under the Alien Carrier Act. They no longer are. That's one of the biggest changes with this new change. And
before we go on, I just want to clarify one thing for people. Under the Fair Housing Act, as we're talking about emotional support animals, that could be any animal. That doesn't have to be.
It's going to vary by city. It's going to really vary. So that'll vary down to the city level.
So they'll want to look up their city and Fair Housing Act and see what
because they're not covered under a federal statute, like service dogs are under the American Disabilities Act. It can vary down to the city level, and there can be, unlike service dogs, where breed specific standards. So there may be a city or a town that bans a certain breed. They are typically exempt if it's a service dog, but as an emotional support animal, they would not typically be protected. So if it's an area that bans pit bulls, for example, they're not going to receive extra protection typically if they're an emotional support animal. Whereas you can fight that battle as a service dog. You still may have a battle to fight, but legally there's no breed specific distinction for a service animal that your dog has to be a certain breed. You will definitely have the best luck with a dog in terms of the most acceptance. That isn't to say other animals can't provide support, because they can, but it will be the least of a battle for you if it is a dog. But I know people that believe very strongly in emotional support birds, much similarly to horses. They live a very long time. They're very intelligent. They're very trainable. So, like I said, I know Seattle has had emotional support cats. So that's something you're going to have to look at on a very individual case by case basis, and see what makes sense for you. And again, an emotional support animal is for somebody who does actually have a disability, has a diagnosis and a letter from their provider. Whereas a pet, you don't, obviously it's just a pet. ESAs or emotional support animals don't have any other public access rights. They're not allowed in restaurants, stores. They're not allowed at this point now in airports or airlines. They aren't allowed in hotels that don't allow dogs. They're not allowed in Airbnbs that don't allow dogs. They have no other rights other than in fair housing. So that's really the one distinction they have now. that's different than a normal pet. So for people that, it can be a stepping stone to a service dog. It could be perhaps your dog isn't trained enough yet and ready to work as a service dog, and you're on that path. So maybe they're a ESA for now, and then later on in their career and their training, they would meet the qualifications of a service dog. So sometimes it could be a stepping stone, and sometimes it could be all that somebody needs. And there can also be dogs that do service tasks, but that don't have public access. So I could have a dog that's very well trained, and I could have a disability, and the dog is mitigating those tasks. But say my dog has issues with being in public. Say my dog doesn't do well around other dogs or is fearful in public. They can be a home companion that provides service to me. They don't have public access rights as defined by the American with Disabilities Act, but they can still be providing a very great service. And so that's one other thing for people to consider is, do you really need your dog out in public with you? They could just be, they won't have the same protection as a service dog, but it's sort of a line in between an emotional support dog who's just bare presence helps, or a service dog who is actually performing a task. So for the dog who says, I really don't want to be out in public, this isn't for me, people should recognize that that dog could still really help them at home and could really provide great support at home.
And could benefit from some training to even do more at home.
Possibly, yeah, depending on kind of their temperament and what is fair for them. So to not be completely discouraged if, hey, I have this dog that does great diabetes alert at home or helps me with all these things at home, but is really shy or terrified in public or is reactive to other dogs. That doesn't mean you can't have a great partner. It just means you need to look at where they go with you.
Absolutely. So service dogs and horses, what are the laws and the rights that they have?
Sure. So they have, and this is where it gets interesting because there's the American with Disabilities Act, which essentially says any place that the public is allowed to go, the dog can go with them. Now, where they can be exempt would be, for example, surgical suites, anything that would fundamentally completely change the nature of the business. So surgical suites, religious institutions also get to make their own choice there, whether dogs are to be allowed. For example, kitchens, if it's something that would fundamentally change the nature. The Equal Opportunity Employment Act doesn't say that somebody with a disability must be allowed to have their service dog. What it says is reasonable accommodation must be provided. Now, the employer is not required to find that that service dog is the most reasonable accommodation. If they can work with that person to find other accommodation, but that is legal within the law. Now, in many cases, if somebody has a service dog, that is the most reasonable accommodation. But the employer is not required to fundamentally change the nature of their business to accommodate you. So if you're working in an engineering lab that is a clean room, that's an anti-static room, that having a dog in there would fundamentally change the nature, the employer is not required to have you there. Similarly, in a food kitchen. So those are some rights they have. Private homes and private businesses, private places that public otherwise would not be allowed in, do not have to follow the American with Disabilities Act. Those are private areas that they can control. But anywhere where the general public could come, that dog can go with them, or miniature horse could go with them.
So that means hotels, if they have a no dogs policy, that means restaurants, that means.
Absolutely. And those hotels may not charge you a pet fee. You should still fill out, they can still ask you to fill out the paperwork that they would ask someone to fill out if you have a dog with you that states their name, that they're healthy, that you're liable for any damage, because you are, but you're not required to pay a pet deposit. Now, I will say typically I choose to travel and stay at places where pets are welcome. I find it just best for everybody. And if I am traveling and say I'm going to an Airbnb that has a no pet policy, I will let them know in advance. There are plenty of cases where people have been denied your stay. There's lots of bulletin boards about that, but I personally would rather not be surprised last second. So I tend to encourage clients and people we work with to communicate up front that it's just best for everybody. Let them know, hey, I've got a service dog with me. Just by the way.
Right. Now,
and typically that goes well.
Now, let's say for whatever reason, you're staying at a hotel, they have a no pets policy, you've got a service dog. How much are they allowed to ask me about that? What am I required to tell them?
Good question. So there are only two things under the American with Disabilities Act that a business can ask you. One is that a service dog? And two, what is the skill they perform for you? You are not required to have any other documentation, no other proof. They may not ask you what your condition is. So those are the only two things they can legally ask. Now, if the dog is disruptive, if they're barking, if they're creating a nuisance, if they're a threat, they can ask you to remove the dog. They can't ask you to remove yourself. You have the right to be there, but they can ask you to remove the dog. So that is something that, businesses get scared to ask people with dogs to leave. And these days, because there are a lot of people that take advantage of how broad the ADA is with service dogs, there are people out there with dogs who really shouldn't be in those situations. And it's become a very hard situation for business owners to know, hey, when do I say, okay, this dog that's sitting on the person's lap that's eating out of their plate, is that really a service dog? Or if they're barking at everybody that comes by, is that really a service dog? It puts them in a really awkward situation. I love that the law is very broad and that it does give access to everybody. And it ensures that somebody who may not have professional training, who may not have a lot of support, can be out there with their dog. But it also is very easy to abuse and take advantage of. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. So with those are some of the laws to think about, are the Equal Employment Act, housing. The other thing that's really changed now is the Airline Carrier Act. So, which coming from the service dog industry is largely a win for people that are service dog handlers. For people that are used to traveling with emotional support animals, it's clearly a loss for them. From the perspective of someone with a service dog, the fact that you can now hopefully more trust that the other animals that are in the airport or on the plane with you actually should be there, have the training to be there, have the temperament to be there, is much safer for you. I've had plenty of cases. I remember riding an Amtrak train years ago, and my dog was laying next to me, and this was a different dog. And the conductor walked by, and my dog looked up and then just looked back down, and the conductor said, "Oh, that's a real one." So what do you mean? So, well, we've had so many issues of dogs startling awake when conductors walk by and the conductors are getting bit, that we've had to do specialized training to help our staff be protected from so-called service dogs. And it's the same thing on airlines, and dogs can be attacked by dogs. It's a really horrible thing for someone with a guide dog, that if a guide dog is attacked, they often can't go back into service. And so recognizing that either out of aggression or often just out of stress or fear, that a dog who's an emotional support animal or a pet may not be suitable in that environment. And so from the perspective of service dog handlers, having more structure makes it a lot safer for those people with service dogs. And then the other really big thing that this act standardized is that you are not required, if you haven't filed or haven't had a plane ticket more than 48 hours in advance, you are not required to give notice that you have a service dog. It used to be you'd go to the airport and it was hit and miss depending on the airline, and hit and miss depending on the airport, that you would have to go up to the counter and pre-register, even if you had already checked in online, pre-register, let them know I have a service dog with me. And then you would be able to go through security and get to the gate, but they had to make sure there was something on your ticket that said you had a service dog. So you had an extra burden and you had to get there early. So that's been removed. That's no longer required. And in addition, depending on the airline, they recognize psychiatric assistance dogs in the same class as emotional support dogs. That is no longer the case. Now it's completely consistent with the American with Disabilities Act.
That's good. That's really good.
So that really helps in terms of the requirements are much more consistent with the ADA. They did remove requiring miniature horses be accepted, which is a logistical sort of issue that from a safety perspective and the airline perspective, fitting a horse to the plane and having room for them has been a problem. As somebody who hasn't handled a miniature horse myself, I can't attest to that. I can't attest to what it's like having a 70-pound lab that I need to have fit in my space. But I do recognize that is a barrier that is different than the ADA. It would be nice if there was a federal standard that things only added to. and didn't take away from. But right now, at least things have aligned much more so that you don't have different things with every single airline. You can go, if you have a service animal, you're not required to have any more documentation. You don't have to have special documentation in advance. You don't have to register in advance. You don't have to check in advance any more than anybody else. If you happen to have a ticket more than 48 hours in advance, then you can upload information, but you aren't required to have that if it's a last minute flight change. And they cannot limit by breed. So there's no restriction on breed of dog, just like under the American Disabilities Act, whereas previously some airlines would put breed specific restrictions. There's no with restriction on size, so that they have to fit within your personal space, which is nothing new. That's been the case. So they have to fit by your feet space or in your lap.
Which makes sense, right? Otherwise you're taking somebody else's space. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so a lot of the laws remain the same, but where they clarified really help remove the ambiguity and the stress of every time you're flying, not knowing what to expect and wondering every time, what's the challenge going to be today? Because that's literally what I have experienced I remember going to an airline, and this was a Delta airline, and showing the regulations to the person at the counter that said I did not have to have a medical health record for my vet, and almost missing a plane while they kept going back to their supervisor and saying, well, she just showed me our own regulations. And they still didn't want to let me through.
Wow.
So
the consistency will definitely make it.
Yeah. So easier. I really think for a lot of animals that are emotional support animals, they don't have the level of exposure and training that full service dogs with public access do. Now, some of them may be perfectly suitable for that work, and giving them that extra training and giving them some tasks could be the answer for that person. If they need the dog to help them in public settings, then giving that dog that additional training so that they really can cope in that situation. It's a very stressful environment to be in an airplane. It's a stressful environment to be in an airport. And it was quite the conundrum that airlines had, that ESAs were allowed inside the plane, but technically they weren't legally allowed outside of a carrier in the airport because that's a public space. So, and they weren't allowed in the bathrooms of the airport or in the restaurants of the airport. So this removes some of that confusion and ambiguity. And because they now fully recognize psychiatric assistance dogs the same as anything else, then that opens the doorway for people that do need their dog to travel with them, and the dog has the right temperament and can do that. That opens the door and removes more barriers for them to work through that training and ensure that the dog is happy in that environment.
That's such a good point. And a perfect segue for us to talk about the work that Atlas dogs do. So after this conversation, I know that there are a bunch of people listening right now who are thinking, that's what I need to do. I need to train my dog, who is been basically my emotional support animal. I need to train them so both of us are better. and get that service animal designation. And that's where you guys come in. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I am super excited about what you guys do.
Sure. And it may be a dog who somebody works with as an ESA, or it may just be a pet and they never really thought about that. And I definitely want to say that not all people that have ESAs necessarily need a service dog, and not all ESAs want to be a service dog. So I want to be really clear on we shouldn't look that, any ESA could just become a service dog. That we really need to see that they have the temperament to work in public, and be comfortable around all kinds of different distractions and strange people and children and dogs and anything they might encounter, and be safe and unobtrusive and reliable. And that they do have tasks they're specifically trained to do for you. So that is one thing to keep in mind, that it's not just sort of a, hey, poof, let's turn an ESA into a service dog. It's okay, is this something I need? And recognizing, by the way, there's, all of us who have been out there with service dogs have had the experience of someone coming up and saying, how lucky you are. You're so lucky to have a service dog. How do I get one? And I think my favorite response from my father at one point when he was frustrated is, well, you too get a debilitating illness, and maybe you can be lucky enough to have a service dog.
Right.
One of the things to also keep in mind, though, is they're a lot of work, right? This is this being that you're responsible for, that as you go, every time you go to get groceries, you're holding a leash, you're carrying them, you're letting them go to the bathroom, you're navigating with them. It's, it's sort of like having a stroller with a kid, right? It's something you're responsible for, and it adds time. And while they may add significant support, there is still burden they add too. And so people should remember not to go into it lightly, that maybe you're exhausted that day. Maybe you're, think about your energy day to day. I'm not sure how much people are used to kind of the spoon theory concept in this community.
Oh, yes,
probably fairly. But, if you think about, well, my dog may take one more spoon, but maybe they ultimately save me 3 over the day, that averages out. But it's something to think about, that each act you do, that you bring your dog with you, may take a little more effort and a little more planning and a little more time. So I don't want people to take that lightly, and thinking, oh, my dog gets to go with me everywhere. Isn't that great? It's like, yeah, they do. So I have all their stuff with me everywhere, and I have to take time to fit them everywhere. And I have to look at their needs, and do they have water? And do they have food? And where can they go to the bathroom? And how long is reasonable for them to stay down? And what happens when the stupid child jumps on them? And so all that stuff. So that said, assuming that's the right fit for them, where Atlas comes in is, we work with people who have dogs who are at least 14 months of age, who have a foundation level of basic obedience skills. Think kind of like what you would pass in the Canine Good Citizen, and don't really have any major behavioral skills to work through, such as separation anxiety or reactivity or aggression to other people or other animals. They just have a good solid foundation. We found there's a lot of other resources out there in the community already to help people raise a good puppy and to work with an adolescent dog. And then but there's not a lot of resources to help people start from that point and understand, how do I self-advocate? How do I work in the public? How do I train my dog to do disability mitigating skills? How do I teach them how to take this basic obedience and then do that in a stressful, busy environment? And so that's where we come in, and we work with them for at least 6 months. Now, part of that 6-month window is it takes at least that much time. And the other is also under the American or under Assistance Dog International. They require we have at least a 6-month relationship with anybody we work with. We have trained volunteers we call team facilitators that may or may not be professional dog trainers. They're all going to be people that have some amount of dog experience. Many of them, we found that nurses, educators are facilitators because they know how to coach, they know how to lead, they know how to do lesson plans. And then we educate them, and then professional trainers mentor them. And we work with our clients. We do initial assessment to see what their needs are, and if our program's a good fit for them, if their dog can be successful, if they can be successful, and if we can meet their needs. If we can, then we partner with them, and typically we meet every other week. These days it's a mix of in-person and virtual. It also depends on location. We do have people in different parts of the country. A lot of us are more centered toward the West Coast, but we do have people on the East Coast and other areas. Then we work with them usually typically every other week, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on need, over at least a 6-month period, really looking at how do we build that dog and that person's confidence in lots of different environments. How do we add on the disability tasks they need or refine the ones the dog may already be offering? And then how do they really get in, like, how do they function in their world carefully? One of the nice differences with our program, we charge, as a comparison, we charge $675 for that 6 months of support. All that budget, what that's designed to do is reimburse our volunteers for mileage and cover the cost of getting a vest. We lose money in our certification program intentionally. The whole point is to make this affordable and accessible to people. And so that's part of this model of working with skilled volunteers. But for our clients, they're getting the benefit of essentially a private trainer working with them. They're needing to do the work on their own. They're doing homework, they're practicing with support all along the way. And one of the nice things is, versus say you're working with a private trainer, you probably can't afford to have them do 10 sessions with you on how do you navigate a bus and go to work and go to school and feel really comfortable. Whereas we really can take that time to work with you and make sure you're really comfortable and confident in your world. How do you talk to your employer about having a service dog? How do you talk to your school or your child's school? And helping you go through and navigating all of that. Along the way, we have online courses that we have you take that talk about dog body language, caring for your dog, talk about the American with Disabilities Act. They give you a prep of what to expect in our public access test. We also have twice a month open what we call office hours for anybody who's a client going through our process or an active client, so that you can come together with some of us and just brainstorm, problem solve, share experiences, and Facebook groups as well for those folks. And then after you're ready to test, we do just our public access test, which is just to kind of say, okay, yep, we're putting a stamp on this team. And then we keep maintaining and following with you, maintaining, updating public access tests, but checking in with people. We really want to set people up for success. So like 6 months before the next public access test, we're going to reach out to you and say, hey, do you need any help? Do you want to get together and maybe reshoot anything? We don't want anybody to go into these and be stressed and surprised. And so the goal is to get functional, supportive, good working teams out there that well represent service dogs anywhere. So they improve the access for everybody anywhere, but really give that access to people who wouldn't otherwise have it through a foundation, couldn't necessarily afford a private trainer. That's where the niche that we are focused right now. We do have one of the other programs Atlas has is an academy for professional trainers, where we train trainers to be service dog trainers. This helps us make sure there's people that are ethical and qualified that are out there for the person that maybe their dog isn't quite ready for our program, or maybe they don't live in an area where we are, or maybe they need more support. Maybe they want somebody to board and train their dog for an amount of time. Then we can refer them to people that we know have the right ethics and skill to work with that private trainer. And then when they're ready, they can come back if they choose and work with us in our program and either collaborate with their trainer currently. And whether that's one of our trainers or a different trainer they're working with, we welcome collaboration with anybody that they feel is part of their support network until the point that they feel comfortable working out in public.
So that public skills test, I'm picturing something like when you go take your driving test, where you're actually like out in public doing the things and somebody's just checking to make sure it's all good.
That's really a good way to look at it. It's a snapshot in time. And we're essentially looking at, okay, are you safe? Is the public safe? Are you safe? Is your dog doing a task that is mitigating your disability? Is there anything we should be worrying about that would reflect poorly on service dogs in general, or a position where you don't have the confidence to problem solve and help your dog or you? So it is sort of just going to restaurants and grocery stores, being around distractions like shopping carts, safety around cars. How do you ride elevators safely? Just making sure that the dog is attentive and able to do stays around distractions, that they'll come to you past distractions. Can they walk past other dogs? Do they care if a squirrel runs by? So it's just kind of checking in, because as dogs age, eventually they start getting sore and grumpier, and they may start responding to things differently than they did before. Or as the team works together, there may be some things that they aren't using for a while, and then all of a sudden the client needs, and maybe they're a little rusty. We really want, one of the nice things with owner-based training is that because the person's involved in training their dog, they themselves gain a lot of skills to customize that dog's training over time. So as their needs change, they can help adapt that dog. Whereas if a dog is provided through a foundation, you often don't have, as a recipient, a lot of dog training skills. You may not know how they were taught anything. Now, some of those organizations provide great support to help you adapt with that dog over time. But you don't have the same fundamental skills to look and say, well, previously I needed my dog to do this. Well, now my condition has changed. Now I need them to do this. And I have the skills as well as the support of the organization to problem solve that and adapt.
That's great. That's great. So you said the cost of your program, tell me again.
Is $675 for 6 months. And that covers everything from the application fee through to the first certification with vest and ID card.
Do you ever have people who need to have more training than 6 months?
We do. And the way we do that is we add on, and this is assuming somebody is within a reasonable driving range of where we have a facilitator and they kind of fit within the needs of our program. Yeah, we do. And if we need that, then we'll just add on $75 a month. So we try to keep it really minimal. And again, just looking at, hey, can we cover mileage for a volunteer who might be driving, up to an hour or so to work with this person? And then we also have scholarship funds to help offset that. So in addition, we've got scholarships to help with initial certifications. And so recognizing that even that could be a barrier for some people. And so really looking at how do we make this as approachable and affordable as possible for everybody.
I love that. And for everyone listening, we are going to have links to Atlas Dog, to a lot of resources for you. So make sure you go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com/55 for today's episode. We'll have all of those links so you can get more information if that is something you're interested in. One of the things I wanted to ask you too, Jennifer, it almost seems like service dogs are a medical device. In a way, right? Like it's helping me live my life because of my health. And so it makes me wonder if there are any tax deductions, insurance, like all of that kind of stuff that we might use for something that is a medical device. How does that work for your program for, just dog expenses?
Sure. I would say that's one of those gray areas that people should talk to their accountant. I would love there to be the day that a dog could be prescribed like any other medical treatment, and they could be covered by insurance, or training could be covered by insurance. If somebody is a veteran or an active duty military, there are, especially say through the Marines, through Semper Fi or other programs, there is funding to help them train their dog. So there are a lot of resources in that world. For the civilian who isn't affiliated with military, I would say talk to your tax accountant about possibly deducting costs for food or medication or training for your dog. That's something that's really, that there's no set cut and dry, does that fit as a medical expense or not? I have known clients try to go through insurance companies to claim them. I have yet to see anybody be successful with actually claiming through insurance. But as a tax deduction, that's something that I would just talk to your accountant on.
Yeah. What about things like FSA or HSA, healthcare savings accounts?
Again, it's going to really depend. So I have seen people successfully use those. So, but yeah, just talking to whoever that provider is, saving up all the records, saving up the receipts from any of your dog's expenses. So that's definitely something, because they do provide a medical service to you. I always encourage people to not think of their dog as a medical device, but as a living being.
Right, exactly.
But it is true that that's something that it's absolutely worth looking into. I would encourage anybody to talk to an accountant and see, what you might be able to do there. Medical deductions are always kind of tricky anyway. So just taking a look and seeing what would fit within your particular situation, it's absolutely worth researching and looking into.
That's great. That was the main thing I wondered was, is it even possible, or should we just stop worrying about it? So that's great. We can definitely have people do that. So I think that's kind of the end of my list of questions for you. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you would like people to know?
I think one of the things that I want that people don't often think about is the challenge that you might have self-training your own dog. It's something that is a wonderful experience, and it builds an incredible bond with your dog, and it builds incredible skills. But it also means that you are putting yourself face to face with whatever the thing is you're struggling with, whatever the thing society tells us we're broken with, and having to be vulnerable, possibly in front of a trainer or possibly at society, so that you repeat that experience enough for your dog to be able to help you. And that can be really traumatic for people. A great example is, and she's very open about this story, but the one employee we have in Atlas has a seizure disorder. And when she was training her dog, he initially is a seizure response dog, because that's one of those areas we don't fully understand how they alert. And he started alerting, and this was when she was college age. He started alerting, and kind of human nature is cause and effect. Dog alerts me, I have a seizure, it's the dog's fault. Right? That's just how our brains are wired. It's just sort of cause and effect operant conditioning. And so it's really easy when you're working with a dog that you want a medical alert to resent them, to say, hey, it's your fault I'm about to have the seizure. Wait a minute, you mean I have to be happy and excited and give this dog a treat now that they're telling me I'm about to have a seizure? It's really mentally challenging. And it's not something that people tend to think about or I want my dog to help me when I'm doing this repetitive behavior, or I want my dog to help me when I'm having a panic attack or breathing a certain way. Some things aren't triggering to reproduce, but some really are. And some can be challenging if I fall on the ground, I want my dog to go push this button or go get help. Well, what if it's really painful for me to get on the ground? So just thinking through some of those challenges, or, I have severe social anxiety and I want my dog to help me with that. Well, that means I'm going to have to go out in public. And so just thinking through all those things and not taking that lightly and making sure you have the support in place to help you with that. That's something that our facilitators focus very carefully on. And we have a mental health committee that helps guide what we do. We have a psychologist and a social worker that we can refer to ask questions. But that's something to really be aware of, is recognize that it's very hard to train your own dog to mitigate your disabilities, because you essentially have to face that part of you. And you need to be able to do it in spite of how crappy you feel that day. And that they're not perfect. They're not robots. It's very important that they get to be dogs, right? That's one of the best parts about a service dog, is they aren't just a medical device, right? They're fluffy and they have tongues and they're silly and they're goofy and they get to play and they're your friends. And so recognizing that they aren't going to be perfect and they're not infallible. So you often want to think of them as a backup medical device. Don't assume that your dog is going to wake you up 100% of the time for that low blood sugar alarm. Have another mechanism in place. Don't put all of that responsibility on that dog. They're another factor to help you have that independence. They're one more thing to make you feel secure. But it's not ethical or fair to put that burden on them or responsible to expect them to operate like a mechanical device. And so look at, are there things technology can do for us very easily that, sure, we could train a dog to do it, but it's a lot harder. For example, there's little litmus strips that you can put in food to see if there's, particular allergens in place, such as gluten. Yeah, dogs can detect it too, but they're less precise and it's a lot more training. So always be thinking of what's worth the effort for training. What are dogs best at doing that devices aren't? And be ready that it's hard work. It's wonderful work. It's absolutely wonderful, but it's very emotionally draining. And just to kind of think about that.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that totally wasn't on my radar.
It's something that, it's something I've realized with doing a lot of private training and working with people, that as the dog trainer, I was just as likely to have a session where my job is to sit with you and let you cry and say, today's session is just about sitting here, as it is teaching the dog to do a skill, right? We as people are the much harder part in the service dog training paradigm than the dog.
Right. Oh, but so true. And I could definitely see how that would be bring up all your crap,
It does. And so making sure that you have good support, and that also you're comfortable setting limits, that, I'm very careful as I'm bringing people out in the field or working with them, if they have social anxiety or they have post-traumatic stress, of working within, okay, when do you have your next counseling session? Who's your support network? Who do you have in place? Your emergency contacts, understanding, what's too much, what's not too much, and going at a pace that's safe for them. And so as people are going out on their own, it's really easy to feel a lot of pressure that I have to go this much further this time, or I just one more repetition, or just like we feel like with our dogs, one more time when we get greedy. We do that to ourselves even more. And so to give yourself the permission to say, I'm not training today, or today, my only goal is to get in the car, drive to the parking lot of the grocery store, and drive home. I don't have to get out. I just have to get in the car in the first place, right? Giving yourself little goals that are steps towards something without burdening yourself of, today I have to go walk into Walmart and spend 10 minutes walking up and down aisles, when yesterday you couldn't walk out the house. So being fair and kind and compassionate to yourself.
I love that. And I would imagine too that it's equally important with your dog to to have fun time and play time and like that bond of experience that's not just all about work?
Absolutely. It's really important. They need downtime too. They work hard. And especially if you're looking at like a medical alert dog, they're always on. They don't have breaks. And so really making sure they have that time to just be dogs, that they, speaking of which, hello, that they just get to be dogs, that they get that fun time too, and that downtime too. That's just really, really important for their own mental health and well-being. So, and that helps them serve you, sort of think about, in order for them to help you, you have to help them. You have to give them the emotional framework to be able to support you. And that's actually something really important for people to think about with chronic illness or with conditions where they are depressed or anxious or stressed. The fact that our dogs are really empathetic to us also means they can take on that emotion. And so that's something we need to be really aware of, is if you have a dog that is helping mitigate anxiety or interrupting panic attacks or things like that, to recognize they need a lot of support so they don't themselves wear down emotionally. And looking at what other support mechanisms do you have in place so that you don't emotionally drain your dog, because they take that on too. So really, no, I think that's what I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that's so fundamentally important, is to recognize they are still a dog and they're a living being, and you should have fun with them and play with them and roll around on the ground with them. And, I think
ear scratches and kisses.
Absolutely. I think the other thing I would call out is for people to be open-minded about the types of dogs that can serve. They don't have to be labs. They don't have to be Goldens. They don't have to be the latest doodle mix of the day. They can be, I've seen Chihuahuas as working dogs. As long as they, for example, it's not uncommon for people with diabetes to have a smaller dog that can just be near and smell their breath. A smaller dog is perfectly capable of alerting you to anxiety, things like that. They're not going to be capable of carrying large items for you. So thinking about what is it you want the dog to do, but be open that they don't have to be a purebred. They don't have to be a specific breed, that lots of different dogs could do lots of different things. And that's something that you can also brainstorm, of being open that you may have an idea in your head of what you want the dog to do, but try to sit back and go, well, what's the problem I really want to solve? Because maybe there's a different way the dog could do it. Or maybe the dog is already offering it in one way, and you just accept, here's how the dog wants to communicate, versus trying to shape it or something else. So just being open to, there are many, many ways dogs can help us, and many different kinds of dogs, and not being biased that they all should look like that golden retriever or Labrador. It really depends on your lifestyle and what your needs are.
Perfect. Well, I think that is a great place to wrap it up, but I do want to give you a chance for everyone who's listening right now, who is like, I don't know. I would love for you to just like speak from your heart about the benefit they might have of going this route and training the dog that they have, or considering having a service animal.
You bet. So, and that's sort of one of those things of, yes, I will often say, oh, it's all this work. But on the other hand, it's this incredible joy that where you may previously have felt that you were tied to a caretaker or a spouse or a partner, that, oh, to get out of bed, I need somebody to bring me my shoes or bring me medication, or I'm dependent on being, I'm worried about being alone in the case a fire alarm goes off and I don't hear it, that I'm worried about being alone in that situation, or I don't feel safe or comfortable going out in public because I don't know if somebody's going to come up and surprise me, or I have this anxiety and pain that I just isn't being dealt with medication or other treatments. That dogs can be the profound way to break through all of that, that they adapt, they think, they learn, they feel. And so they are your partner in all of this. So they're really, kind of your earlier point, we don't certify dogs or people, we certify teams. And so when you have a dog that is happy in their job, that wants to be where they're at, is comfortable and confident, then you have a partner that will help make you confident. They give you a reason to get up every day. They give you a routine. They make you a better version of you. And they let you do more things than just, maybe they bring your toothbrush, maybe they bring your medication, but they also might be the reason you then decide to go to a concert. They might be the reason you decide to feel safe and walk in the library. They might be that extra thing that says, okay, I can go stand in that line at the grocery store and know my dog's going to tell me if somebody walks behind me, so I'm not terrified. Or that little bit of extra support that, oh, my legs are kind of dragging or dropping. I'm a little scared to go walking, but I can go on my own with my dog rather than having to have somebody else come with me. I can have that independence and know I can do it on my own. So they really are about providing a massive amount of independence for the individual. And the other thing is to remember, they can also really help somebody who is a caretaker. So you could have the person with a disability could be a child. It could be an adult who isn't able to manage the dog themselves. Then the three of you become a team. And that really gives that caretaker an incredible break. And we're working with one family that had a young child with a seizure disorder, and they could barely take their eyes off that child. They were so scared. But just having the dog able to check and then come and alert them, or that the dog can just bring somebody, pull the blankets off, bring them some medication, just give them that break, even for a half hour, that you can go take a nap or read a book, knowing that the person's being monitored and the dog will let you know if something's going on. That break for the caretakers is huge. And so something else to think about, that just the level of independence it gives the individual that the dog is serving. And then if there is a caretaker involved, the break it gives them is a win-win for all. And so if you think a service dog is right for you, I really encourage you to check it out. Come check out our website. We actually have in our page where we have a client pre-application package, as we call it. There's different articles in there that you can download that help you walk through the thought process of, is a service dog right for me? And is self-training a service dog right for me? That really help you kind of visit that and see, yes, this is what I want or not. And you're welcome to reach out to us and ask us questions. Even if you're not in an area that we serve, happy to help you and try to help you find resources. So, I love having a service dog. I don't take it lightly, but he makes my world better every day.
That's awesome. And that is a perfect place to wrap it up. Everyone, if you are interested, their website is atlasdog.org. We will also have all the links, like I said, at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/55. And Jennifer, thank you so much. This was fascinating. And I am so excited to be able to share you and what you do and the benefits of service animals with our community. So thanks again.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
And that wraps up another episode of the Fibromyalgia Podcast. If you're ready to see if working with a fibromyalgia coach can help you feel better faster, visit fibromyalgiapodcast.com, where you can schedule a complimentary consultation to explore your options. During this call, we'll discuss your fibromyalgia journey, what your needs and challenges are, and give you recommendations on how to reach your goals the quickest way possible. Thank you for tuning in today, and join us next time as we explore more ways to help you take back control of your life and health. My music and sound editing were done by Daniel Munkus at Subtle Soup Records. Podcast management and creative copy by Sonia Louise of Performance Podcasting.